get your children out of the data collection, because they are collecting data and they use it to push more and more of this culturally responsive teaching, this culture shift, this emotional manipulation. They use that data against your children. Please get them out of the data. Stop letting them take surveys, because that's a huge driver for all of this.
Welcome, everybody, to Conversations That Matter. I'm your host, Alex Newman. With us, a returning guest, a very special guest. Her name is Jennifer McWilliams. She has an absolutely fascinating story. She's one of those rare individuals who stood up for her convictions and paid the price. And now I think very good things are happening as a result of that decision. She was a public school teacher up until 2020, and she started speaking out. She started asking questions about social emotional learning, better known as SEL, and eventually she ended up getting fired for speaking out about this and trying to protect the children in her school, trying to protect the rights of parents there. Now she is a consultant on SEL all across the country, and she's in the middle of a lawsuit right now defending her right to free speech. And she's also in the middle of a lawsuit against SEL in Tennessee. It's what she's doing now. She's a member of the American Enterprise Institute's Conservative Education Reform Network. She's written for a bunch of different publications. And she is doing some very, very important work. Jennifer, thank you for joining us. Tell us about the lawsuit that you're involved in Tennessee involving critical race theory and SEL.
Sure. Hey, Alex, it's great to be back. Thank you for having me. So last spring, I was contacted by a mother and father out of a school district. They had just put their kindergartner in school, and they were really concerned about some of the books that were being read to their child. And they reached out to try to understand what was going on. And I worked with them and helped teach them what social emotional learning is. And they ended up being able to get what we hope is going to be a domino effect across this country, because Tennessee is one of the states that actually banned critical race theory. And once I explained to them what social emotional learning was and how it was violating that ban, they were able to get a constitutional attorney named Larry Crane and bring a lawsuit to their school district that argues that social emotional learning is a violation of the critical race theory ban.
That is fascinating, Jennifer. And, when I started looking into SEL, I went to all the, big websites, Castle, the collaborative or academic social emotional learning, and this race mongering stuff was absolutely everywhere, that SEL is a tool to make children reflect on racial injustice and all this stuff. And yet, officially, they say, oh, no, SEL is not critical race theory. SEL is not a tool for indoctrination. Tell us why you think SEL is a violation of this ban on CRT that Tennessee and many other states, including my own here in Florida, have imposed, at least as it relates to government school teachers funded by taxpayers brainwashing kids.
Sure. So social emotional learning, of course, it sounds nice. They say that it's going to teach your children empathy, to build relationships, manage their emotions. But one of the things that people don't understand is that those things that they're teaching children are not how a lot of people would teach their children. They're through what they call an equity lens. So these things are delivered to children through the viewpoint of someone that believes that our country is systemically racist and oppressive. And one of the parts of social emotional learning, it was a systemic change. So it changed everything in education. And one of the things that they use is something called culturally responsive teaching. And culturally responsive teaching comes from a woman by the name of Gloria Ladson-Billings. And it is a teaching method that teachers are supposed to use in all academics that actually is supposed to teach children to gain a socio-political consciousness that will critique the social norms that we have today and view them as inequitable to the system. So basically what they're doing is a thought reform program to teach children how to think through the lens of critical race theory. And social emotional learning, I tell people, they're not teaching your children exactly what critical race theory is. They're not telling them there is a theory, this is what it means. They have transformed the entire education system around the theory as an objective truth. And therefore, they are teaching critical race theory to your children.
Yeah. It's so ironic, too. I grew up in schools all over the world with children from all over the world, and we never had any culturally responsive teaching. We just taught math, we taught reading, pretty simple stuff, and we all ended up pretty okay anyways. Jennifer, I'm curious, what do you think the agenda is? Why are they pushing this so hard on little children? And how embedded is it? I mean, I know our governor here in Florida, they actually banned a whole bunch of math books because they said the CRT stuff was in the math, and the liberals went crazy. Oh, he's banning math books now. But when you look at it, these math problems are like, there's this much racism. How do you deal with this? So it was like pretty in your face. But how ubiquitous is this stuff in the schools in Tennessee and around the country?
This is in over 90% of the public education system. That number comes from 2016. So at this point, I believe it is in probably at least 99% of the public education system. It's also going into private schools, especially schools that are taking vouchers and things like that. But it is everywhere. And one of the things that social emotional learning claims to teach children is there's 5 competencies. And when you hear those competencies, they sound nice. Everybody wants their children to have these skills. Those skills are self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. And that sounds nice. Everybody wants their kids to have those. But again, what people need to understand is those are being delivered to your children through this equity lens. So the reason they want to teach self-awareness is they want these children to understand that depending on their identities, they are responsible in society. They're either privileged or oppressed, and they need to manage their emotions around that idea. And then when they make their responsible decisions, it's not responsible decisions like I would teach my child. It's responsible decisions based on if you are an oppressor or if you are privileged. So if you are white, they want to influence your children when they grow up to be adults to vote for something like reparations. That would be a responsible decision through this system. It is literally psychological manipulation of these children to separate them from their parents to push this collectivist society.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And it is just so systemic at this point. And actually, it's the same tool that the Marxists used for in so many countries before us, where they divide people up exactly in those 2 categories. You have oppressor and oppressed, and the oppressed are brainwashed that they have to overthrow and revolt and have a revolution, and the oppressors are brainwashed to do self-criticism and to feel guilty and to basically not resist the incoming revolution. And it sounds like that's what our children are being prepared for. Jennifer, we've only got a few minutes left before we go to our first break, but what kind of effects? I mean, you were in the schools while this stuff was coming in. What kind of effects did you notice that it was having on children? Did you notice any harm coming to children who were being subjected to this stuff?
Yes. So the systemic change of social emotional learning is detrimental to them in every area because, they're teaching children to compromise their beliefs, to compromise anything that they have been taught, to make decisions based on what's good for the collective, what's good for the group, not for individuals. And when you realize and see what's happening in our schools right now with the whole transgenderism push into our schools, and it's become quite a social contagion. And these kids they're confused. They have no grounding in school. There's no structure. So when you are an adolescent and you are just trying to figure out life, and you have adults pushing these massively subjective ideas on these children, it's just creating chaos, and it's really sad. And then there's parents that just can't put their finger on it because it's a complicated system to understand. And so we just have a huge problem right now because in the school, when the kids go to school, if they say, my parents don't understand, what teenager growing up doesn't say that at some point, then the school basically is like, well, we're here for you. The idea is we're the parents now. When they sold social emotional learning in the very beginning, they literally came out and said, parents can no longer teach their children the life skills they need. And that's how they got into the school. They said, we have to do it for them. And so when you think about that, if that were true and parents really can't teach the life skills that students need, then they clearly can't make medical decisions for their child, and they clearly can't teach their children spirituality. And so the schools are becoming that for the children.
Yep, that's exactly what's happening. The parental replacement centers trying to build what the Soviets used to call the new Soviet man. And folks, if you look at the parallels, if you look at what the Soviets were trying to do with the restructuring of human nature, with the building of these this new Soviet man ideal, it's just what's happening today in the schools is a more weaponized, more advanced version of that exact same process. It's absolutely terrifying. I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on how parents should respond to this? I think this is new information for a lot of parents. A lot of parents don't even realize this is happening yet. The ones that do don't quite understand how nefarious this is. So what advice do you have for moms and dads out there, or caregiver one and caregiver two, to use the modern parlance, in terms of protecting their children from this?
So, first of all, we have to acknowledge what's happening. And I know one of the things that social emotional learning is really good about, I guess, or bad, the way you look at it, but it is, they play a game of semantics deception with people. It's very complicated for people to see this. So as I was talking about culturally responsive teaching, if you just go to your state Department of Education site, just type in culturally responsive teaching or cultural competence and see if it's there, because I guarantee it is. And just so when you pull it up, it won't sound bad. They'll say, of course, we're just bringing life's experiences into the classroom to teach children academics. But what people have to understand is it is this thought reform process. Another thing with social emotional learning and the semantics for parents that need to understand. So this lawsuit in Tennessee is specifically about the social emotional learning program called Wit and Wisdom. But it doesn't matter if your school uses wit or wisdom. The school that I was fired from used a program called Leader in Me. There is another massive one called Second Step. But there are over 100 social emotional learning programs, and they all follow the same framework from CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And they all operate the same way. They just use different language. So it's very difficult. People will look at their school and say, well, she was talking about wit and wisdom. We don't have it, but you do have it. It just may not be called that. So don't be fooled by the language that they're using. What you're looking for is the competencies and the framework of CASEL. And if you dig, you'll find it.
Yeah, absolutely. They always do this intentionally. It's like a slippery eel, right? You think you're going to pin it down, and then it's slithers away, and that's not here. Don't worry. Truly amazing. Jennifer, I want to ask you about kind of one of the more controversial elements here. When I first started digging into SEL, like I said, I went to CASEL's website and I went to the history tab. Like, oh, what's the history of this? This is interesting. And they took it down now after we started exposing it. But it said right there at the top that the idea for this originally came out of the Fetzer Institute. Now, I was not familiar with the Fetzer Institute, but it took me all of 30 seconds of research to figure out that this was some new age weirdo occult organization based on the teachings of that weirdo Alice Bailey, the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. What's the tie-in with the occult here and the spirituality? Because SEL is deeply intertwined with the spirituality education. Give us just a sneak preview of what's going on here under the hood.
Sure. And I have done a ton of research on the Fetzer Institute and John Fetzer. So this social emotional learning and CASEL were both founded at the Fetzer Institute. And people have to understand the Fetzer Institute was created to make a global spiritual movement, to be part of the one world order. And that's not conspiracy. That's true.
That's right. You can go to their website and see this, right? The one world spirituality. I mean, it's all over, it's plastered all over the site.
So in their theory of change, I found this very interesting. In their theory of change, they actually state that in order to, what I would say, infect a generation of children with this thought process, they had to find a entry point into the schools that was non-spiritual, so that once they got into the schools, then they could spread their spirituality. And that's literally in their theory of change. And the way they did that was with social emotional learning and CASEL. And so a lot of social emotional learning programs talk about these, mindfulness, and they've started pushing neuroscience and changing the way that children have their brains wired, and and they're going to rewire their brains, their neuroplasticity of the brain, and through these practices. So it's a major part of social emotional learning is to meditate and use yoga and try to teach them how to start thinking differently, because they say they need to take them from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And that sounds good. A lot of people think, well, of course you want your child to grow, but that's not what they mean. They mean a fixed mindset to them is a traditional American, values and, everything that we've been brought up on and founded here in this country. What they mean is to take them from that to a growth mindset, to believe in this one world order, to find spirituality through the process of believing that you can be your own God. And so they're influencing the children in that way. They are even, and I've started doing research on this recently, but they are trying to create a new discipline in the schools that is the idea of is to suppress the fight or flight aspect of children or people that we have. But that's not, that's something that can be good. We need to know if we're in danger, and they are trying to use practices, neuroscience practices, to start to teach these children to suppress that aspect of their thought process.
Yeah. Folks, it's hard to overstate the nefariousness of this. And, we've been talking for many years about Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030. If you actually read these UN documents, they make very clear they view the role of education as changing the attitudes, the values, the beliefs of children. They don't want them to believe in an objective right and wrong. There's just 50,000 shades of gray. It's all very, very disturbing. Jennifer, what about the teachers? Because I think a lot of conservatives are under this idea that if we just have our state legislature ban this, then everything's going to be fine. And yet these teachers, they're going through these state colleges, these state universities. Most of them are well-meaning. They're not going in there because they want to brainwash kids. They're going in there because they want to teach, they want to help. And yet they're being taught that this is the correct way to do it. Science says this is how you have to deal with these kids. What do we do about this? And is there any way to counter this?
Sure. So yes, a lot of the younger teachers, they are just being trained. This is how they are being taught that you teach. And I think it's really important for teachers. I know that there's a lot of the older teachers that are in the schools. I hear from them all the time. I'm sure you do. They're basically prisoners. They're afraid to speak out because they don't want to lose their job. But if we want to save these children and save this country, people just have to start speaking out and speaking up or reaching out to people. And I have found, I've been doing this now for, it's crazy, but 3 years. And the longer we go and the more people speak out, it encourages others. And we just have to continue to educate people on what's going on. I also think that parent groups, parents in the community, when you start to give support to those teachers, they'll be more likely to, speak out as to what's going on. So we just have to coalesce and really grow in the strength of coming and taking this back somehow.
Yeah, absolutely, Jennifer. We've got less than 2 minutes left. A couple of concrete actions. What are some immediate things that parents can do? Do you have any recommendations for parents, for teachers, for school board members, people who may be watching this?
Sure. So if your state is one that bans CRT, we can, do the same lawsuit that we did in Tennessee. It doesn't matter. Again, if your program is called Wit and Wisdom, you have it in your school, we can argue it. And then another thing, we didn't get into it a lot, but I just want parents to know, get your children out of the data collection, because they are collecting data and they use it to push more and more of this culturally responsive teaching, this culture shift, this emotional manipulation. They use that data against your children. Please get them out of the data. Stop letting them take surveys, because that's a huge driver for all of this.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Jennifer. And that's how they even determine, if you read their documents, they take all this data from the surveys, from the feedback, even increasingly like biofeedback, electronic feedback. And they say, oh, this child doesn't believe the right thing about XYZ issue. We need to circle back with an intervention and hammer them. Jennifer, before we let you go, what's the best way to find you? Do you have a website? Are you on social media? How can people get in touch?
Sure. My website is jennifermcwilliamsconsulting.com, and on Twitter, it's JENN_MCW.
Very good. Well, Jennifer McWilliams, thank you so much for having the courage to speak out. Thank you for all the incredible work that you're doing. Best of luck on your lawsuit. We'll keep in touch. And as soon as something happens on that, we'd love to get you back on. So thanks again for what you're doing, Jennifer.
Thank you.
All righty, folks. That was Jennifer McWilliams with Jennifer McWilliams Consulting. I'm Alex Newman for The New American. This is Conversations That Matter. Until next time, God bless you all.